So welcome everybody to the fourth in our series of the Keys to Recovery series. We've all had a long journey in terms of the battle against COVID, and there's nobody who's been fighting harder, I think, than Paul Dennett to actually come up with the answer to our big question today, which is how can strategic planning help Greater Manchester to build back? As you know, we've now got a Places for Everyone consultation, which was out on Monday. I think we're 8 weeks to get the feedback. Today, I hope will also be really helpful in that consultation process to think around the messages that Greater Manchester need to build back better, and really answer some of those really difficult questions about how we're going to deliver truly great homes for Greater Manchester. And here we go. So just a little bit about Homes for Greater Manchester. It's basically, we come together, we bring together all the people in Greater Manchester in a coalition to really get those voices and talk about and thinking about lobbying and influencing and getting that message through that we do have powers, not enough necessarily, but we have the powers to do things differently. And we want to lead the way as we go forward. So this particular Keys to Recovery Summit series actually builds on the action plan from last year when we went out and about. Then COVID struck, but we carried on. So big questions we're asking as we actually sort of adapted or adjusted or not in terms of those pressures that and the awareness building around how we work, live, rest and play. So there's a specific action point to government and call from the series last year, and that was, just to refresh our memories, to call on the government to commit to revise and improve planning conditions and processes which reflect what we have learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, to improve indoor and outdoor environments and generate greener and healthier spaces to live. We want to deliver truly affordable housing in Greater Manchester. The planning process needs urgent reform. We need planning powers which support Greater Manchester's placemaking ambitions and which also help deliver small site development as well as high impact regeneration projects. So there's a lot there to unpick, but that action point is really so relevant because what I'm really proud of is that Greater Manchester is talking about the impact on health. They are the tripartite agreement, bringing that sort of the future and thinking about differently how it all connects into better housing. So there's a huge challenge. The numbers, Paul Dennett will talk about those and the challenges that we need to do in terms of building those great homes and places in Greater Manchester. But the spatial planning process should work to accelerate particularly the other challenge, which is a green recovery, regenerating town centres and cater for that growing population. Greater Manchester's also got a proud history of innovation, so we need to unlock that innovation. We need to unlock the land across the conurbation and build back better, and we need to scale up housing delivery. So no pressure, Paul. It's been a journey, as I said earlier. This is our final session, and it's time, as to say, to reflect on Places for Everyone. So let's have a look at the quick agenda. And so I'm just doing a quick introduction here. Paul's going to tell us more about the consultation process and what's in Places for Everyone. Then we're going to we've got some great lineup of speakers and contributors to answer that big question. of how we're going to build back that strategic planning. But there are other questions. It's, what will the spatial planning in Greater Manchester look like under Places for Everyone? How can Greater Manchester's Places for Everyone plan unlock that innovation I talked about? And what effect will Greater Manchester spatial planning have on accelerating that green recovery? So there's lots for us to talk about. Of course, what I would like you to do is to keep your do the old mute, unmute very proficiently. So keep your microphones off. Use the hashtag Keys to Recovery. Tag at Great Homes for Greater Manchester. Let's get that debate really moving online. I want you to use the chat as far as possible to ask questions or indicate that you want to answer a question as we go forward. That's all straightforward. We're all very expert at this by now. I think we've got a great audience and a great panel. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Paul Dennett, the Mayor of Salford, but also the GMCA's housing lead. Paul, really nice to see you.
Thanks very much, Jill, and delighted to be here this morning. I think what I'm going to do is, first of all, just talk a little bit about building back better, and obviously couch that in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think, because of COVID, we know we've seen an unprecedented shock, both within the economy, within society at large, and also increasingly within our environment. In the short term, what we've seen from national government is interventions, whether that be through things like furlough or grant support for businesses. And what we know is these are now starting to taper off, and increasingly the emphasis within our economy and within government seems to be on supporting people to retrain, to upskill, and to ultimately access employment. I think for us, we all know that COVID-19 hasn't been the great leveler that it was once talked about. It's disproportionately had an impact on younger people, also those who are over 50, and Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups as well. There will inevitably be an increased emphasis, I think, moving forward on spending more smartly from the government, with a renewed focus on what we've often termed public sector reform. And obviously the longer term impacts of COVID-19, I don't think are yet fully understood. But I think there are some clear insights we can take from the pandemic in terms of, what we've actually seen and witnessed within our economy, within society more broadly. There's certainly been some structural shifts that have intensified and accelerated. So we know, for example, the demand for traditional bricks and mortar retail has certainly declined as more and more people are transacting online. There's more of an emphasis on the public realm and active travel and the quality of our environment. Homes for people are not just simply housing numbers, and that has certainly come through during this pandemic. There's a demand to deal with community economic underperformance as well, and also poor population health. And this, in many respects, isn't new if you're familiar with the work of Sir Michael Marmot. And we know 10 years on from Sir Michael Marmot's work, all the indices are getting worse. So actually intervening to improve health is absolutely at the heart of plan making, I would argue. But importantly, to access jobs, business diversity, research and development, and to drive international investment, these will all continue to be key when we're thinking about this and planning for this in the future. And responding to these shifts is central not only to our economic recovery, but also to transitioning to what we often refer to as a zero carbon economy, or a people and community centric approach to the design and delivery of public services. For me, place leadership is more important than ever to tackle these new challenges we now face as a society. We have to show that, in cities or city regions like Greater Manchester, it isn't simply a case of job done, and the national recovery inevitably is linked to the success of cities and city regions. Cities for me are the answer to delivering the national agenda in relation to building more homes, creating innovation-based economies, and boosting international trade and investment, and a productive and diverse business base. And we've got to harness that in our plan making. We can achieve more ultimately, in my opinion, by aligning national and local investment priorities, including by working in partnership with our neighbouring towns and cities. Build Back Better ultimately is much more than strategic planning, but ultimately strategic planning is an essential building block to underpin and to support the delivery of our vision for better connected, sustainable neighbourhoods with access to good quality and well-built homes, affordable to residents, obviously depending on their circumstances. And ultimately where there's easy and attractive access to open space, even in our most densely developed and often deprived neighbourhoods across the city region. And where there is a range of good jobs that people can both access physically, but also in terms of their own skills and education. Places for Everyone is a strategic plan that contains strategic policies. Each and every local authority in Greater Manchester will interpret these policies as appropriate through their own local plans. So Places for Everyone needs to be considered in conjunction with local plans, with our Greater Manchester housing strategy, with the Transport 2040 strategy, the infrastructure framework, and the 5-year environmental plan here in Greater Manchester. It isn't a plan that stands on its own, but actually a plan that interfaces with everything we're doing across Greater Manchester. So on to Places for Everyone. This is a plan that seeks to provide a strategic policy framework to ultimately meet our housing needs, deliver inclusive growth to all parts of the plan area, and deliver more affordable housing, support the move ultimately to a carbon neutral Greater Manchester. The plan sets out a balanced approach where the majority of development is in the urban area. However, there are a limited number of sites to be released in what we refer to as sustainable locations, supported by infrastructure, including green infrastructure. The approach in the plan is to support continued and strong growth at the core of the conurbation, where over 50% of housing land is identified and the vast majority of office floor space is located in the city centre and the immediate surrounding wards. Importantly as well for the plan, what we're seeking to do here is boost the competitive of the north of Greater Manchester. If you like, it's Greater Manchester's own form of levelling up by providing a wide range of high quality employment opportunities served by public transport, which are accessible to communities in the north of the city region, supported by sufficient housing to meet the needs of the northern districts and allow for diversity in the range of housing. In addition to this, the plan also seeks to ensure that the drivers of growth within the city region, in the south predominantly, are supported. And this includes the airport and obviously forthcoming HS2, and that a significant proportion of the housing needs are met within the southern area of the city region. So looking at land supply identified within the plan, what we can say is 90% is actually in the urban area for housing. 99% for offices is in the urban area. And industry and warehousing, 47% of the land supply identified is in the urban area. So in a sense, there is a limited greenbelt release being proposed in Places for Everyone. 1,754 hectares across the plan area represents a 3.1 reduction in the size of the greenbelt, over 60% less than what was proposed for the 9 districts in the spatial framework in 2016. So there's been significant changes, and you could argue that probably when you compare the plan today to what was proposed in 2016, there's been a radical redraft and radical rewrite of the plan. In terms of planning for housing, obviously we are required to use the government's standard methodology for calculating local housing need. And, you know, for us, we haven't identified any exceptional circumstances to deviate from this approach. What that equates to for Greater Manchester is 10,305 homes per annum that we're required to deliver, which is just under 165,000 homes over the period of the plan. The local housing need also accommodates recent changes that the government made back in December 2020, where the City of Manchester saw a 35% uplift in its local housing need numbers. Ultimately, within this plan, there is a focus on apartment buildings, accounting for, I think, around 60% of the overall supply. So we are doing urban density, which is critical when it comes to protecting our green spaces and, importantly, protecting our green belt. The pandemic has ultimately highlighted the importance of quality of new homes, and the plan seeks to ensure that all new homes are built to meet the nationally described space standards and the accessible and adaptable building regulations standard. All new homes and other development will be required to be net zero carbon by 2028. And the mayoral manifesto promise was to accelerate this also recently for social housing. The plan, as you probably know, seeks to support the Greater Manchester ambition to deliver 50,000 additional affordable homes over the period of the plan. 30,000 of these will be social or affordable homes, and also to access green space has become ever more important than in the last 12 months during COVID, really. The plan ultimately seeks to balance protection, is what we refer to, of our green infrastructure. And what we mean by that is, 40% of the actual green infrastructure, is potentially at risk within Greater Manchester if we don't have a plan. Why? Because it's not actually in the green belt, but yet it provides significant utility to residents within Greater Manchester and our communities. And this is really important. And I think this sits at the heart of why plan making is so important, because for us, planning by appeal is not really an alternative. One, it is costly for local authorities, and also it often leads to development happening anywhere within the city region, and potentially it could lead to really important land with great public utility being developed. So onto the consultation. So where we're at the moment is the Regulation 19 part of the consultation. So it's called the publication stage. It's the formal stage in the plan making process, and it represents the plan that the districts intend ultimately to submit to the Secretary of State for examination, subject to no significant issues relating to the soundness arising from obviously the consultation we're now engaged in. The consultation, as you've highlighted, will run for 8 weeks, and it runs from the 9th of August up until the 3rd of October. And what we're doing is encouraging residents, businesses, developers, house builders, stakeholders, people interested in the plan making process within Greater Manchester to get involved and actually participate in the consultation. Ultimately, what this consultation will be doing is testing our plan against the tests of soundness within the National Planning Policy Framework, and obviously ensuring that this plan is legally compliant with the provisions within there. We have a duty to cooperate, and obviously we're taking those duties very seriously with adjacent local authorities and Stockport Metropolitan Borough Council, as we know, who aren't part of Places for Everyone, but inevitably are a strategic part of the city region. All consultation responses that are received through this 8-week period of consultation will be forwarded on to the Secretary of State and the Planning Inspectorate as part of the examination in public process. So hopefully that gives you a real flavour for places for everyone and what we're trying to achieve here in Greater Manchester. I think now more than ever, actually having a clear, coherent plan for the city region is really, really important as we recover from COVID-19, but also as we look to government to build back better and also look to the rest of the world to really drive forward the Greater Manchester economy. I think now is a really important time that Greater Manchester looks outward to the rest of the world and build back better in its own way, in partnership with each other, but also using this plan as a vehicle to lobby and influence government for fairer and more investment to deliver on our many strategies and visions we have. Thank you very much, Gill.
Thank you. That's brilliant, Paul. And, you know, I hope that today is a really good kickoff to the consultation in terms of getting those, you know, range of views and feedback on what seems to be a fantastic plan for Greater Manchester. You know, I'm interested in some of the newer language, or maybe it's just new to me, but the around the planning process about being sound, you know, that sound decisions and are made, you know, because we don't have to look very far to see where some decisions around planning have not been very successful. I mean, this is around building back better, and strategically, sounds like a really good plan for Greater Manchester. But now we're going to move on to get some responses and some other thoughts from our esteemed panel. We have kicking off Sarah Longlands, who's no stranger to Greater Manchester, formerly of the IPPR North and now in charge of CLES, and picking up on those points around the local economy, the importance of the city region, how it all connects is so important to you know, our future. So Sarah, the running order here is that Sarah, Steve Coffey from who's chair of Homes to the North. We've also got Victoria Hills, chief executive of the Royal Town Planning Institute. Adam Johnston's got childcare issues, and he was from Urban Splash, very well known in Greater Manchester. So I don't think he's joining us now, and we've also got innovation and other things. We've got Dr. Ian Mell from University of Manchester. So, but to kick off that big question that we're asking today on the keys to recovery, looking inside and thinking more around that plan, I'm going to ask Sarah Longlands to come in now. Okay, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Gill, and thanks for the opportunity to come along here this morning to tell you some of my thoughts on this big question, and to sort of think about what this means for Greater Manchester in the longer term, because of course planning is such a long-term endeavour that it's really important that we start with that mindset. So I want to just look at three key issues briefly to try and answer that question as to how strategic planning can help Manchester in its desire to try and build a different type of place, a better type of place for people in the longer term. And the first really is to reflect on the work of CLES. And for those of you who don't know us, CLES is 35 years old this year. We're a think tank based in Manchester, and our work is about trying to create better local economic development for people, place and planet. And we're also a charity as well. And one of the things that we've been doing a huge amount of thinking on over the last decade is about how we use land and assets to really build communities from the inside and to really grow and develop communities. And to that end, we've recently just published the first in what we think the first kind of land commission for the UK. And that land commission looked at the potential for land and its ability to build community wealth in the Liverpool city region, and we did it with the city region there. And that looked particularly at what we mean by land, because when we talk about housing, what we're ultimately thinking about is land and what that can generate in terms of wealth. And I think one of our main conclusions is that land is physical, but it's also very much social. And how we think about and use land comes down to our perceptions of use and of value. And what strategic planning can help us to do is to navigate that debate. And it can help us to negotiate the different interests and values around the table in a more structured way than perhaps has hitherto been the case. And it gives us a way to do that that I don't think we've had previously in the context of the city region. So that's the first thing, about recognising that the debate on housing and land is not just about a physical commodity, but it's actually about people's lives and the interaction of people's lives with the economy, very much at the sharp end. And the second, I think, answer to the question as to how strategic planning can help Greater Manchester kind of really build back better is about the importance of land and assets in building and supporting wealth of place. And for us at CLES, we've done a huge amount of work thinking about community wealth building and what that means and how you can really leverage the value of assets to put money back into people's pockets. And one of the 5 principles that we talk about in our work on community wealth building is land and property and assets. And what's really interesting about the debate on housing is that land, property, assets have really become a metaphor for how we think about wealth in this country. It's become a metaphor for, at times, inequality, for unfairness, for a sense of people not having the same opportunities as others. And we've seen that played out particularly in London and the southeast with huge levels of unaffordability. And we don't want to simply replicate that scenario in Greater Manchester. We have an opportunity here through the strategic planning process to do something different and to make land and property and assets actually work for the benefits of our communities. And that is in everybody's interest, and particularly given the crises that we are working through at the moment, which has really highlighted the level of inequality that areas like Greater Manchester face. COVID-19 has not created inequality. It has simply rolled back the facade and shown us just how far we still have to go. And how we use land and property and housing is going to be crucial in terms of building something that is better than went before. And so strategic planning can help us to understand how to make the most of land and assets in a way which benefits communities right across Manchester. And that's about issues such as affordable homes that Paul mentioned. It's about retrofitting. It's about creating good quality places for people to live. And it's also about tackling some of the really poor housing that we have in Greater Manchester as well, and making sure that everyone has a chance to live in a decent home and to raise their family there. So that's the second thing about how we can use strategic planning to really extract the most out of the assets and land and benefits that we have. And then the third kind of point I wanted to make is about that strategic planning is vital to help provide certainty and structure for the market and to safeguard the public interest. And planning is often framed as the enemy of the peace, that it's a public versus private debate. But in reality, each need each other just as much as the public need private and private need the public. And in particular, if we want to live in a good place where people have decent lives. And I think that trying to move away from this confrontational debate and recognising the fact that the public sector is just as much a market actor, if you like, as the private sector is really important, and showing how through intervention we can actually get better outcomes for people in Greater Manchester, rather than just simply leaving it to the market alone. I think it's a really important part of what strategic planning can provide to Greater Manchester in the longer term. So those are the 3 main points I wanted to make. The point about land and the work that we've done on Land Commission and showing how we can navigate the debate. The second point about needing to reset our approach to land and assets in a way which is fairer. And thirdly, about recognising the interconnectivity between the public and the private sector in the debate about how we move forward and build a better place in Greater Manchester. So I'd be really interested in getting your thoughts and happy to take any questions on that.
That's great, Sarah. Really good. And I think that what's coming out very much is that whole sort of connecting about joining it up. And I think that's the sort of golden thread running through where we really want to be. I think that the point about joining up also, the point that Paul made around regional disparities and opportunities, the sort of inequalities that prevail. They, in Greater Manchester, you can see that it's inter and intra-regional. And I think I'd be interested to see what Steve Coffey, our next speaker, has to say, for who's speaking on behalf of the Homes for the North. Obviously, you'll pick up that he's a Liverpudlian, but we'll let him let him into Greater Manchester. But I think, on that big question that we're asking around strategic planning, and as we talk about joining everything up and really planning for the future, I think that was a name of a white paper, government white paper, many moons ago, or still is. But so I'll bring you in now, Steve, and just FYI, he's actually in isolation. So here you go, Steve.
Thanks very much, Jill. I was actually hoping no one had noticed that I was a Scouser, actually, by the accent, but never mind. I think the first thing is to say that for Homes, I am here on behalf of Homes of the North as Deputy Chair of Homes of the North, and helping sort of the UK once more realise the enormous potential of the towns, cities and places across the North is what Homes of the North is about. And so, today's conversation is fantastic in that respect, and actually gives a great opportunity for us to talk about the strategic planning's contribution to that objective. And I would say, as a Scouser, one of the great examples of the way we've begun to work together in the North over recent years is that there isn't that so much of that competition anymore, and everyone, whether you're from Liverpool, whether you're from Leeds, whether you're from Newcastle, recognise that a successful Manchester is a huge driver and economic engine that we can all benefit from in the North, and very positive for the North as a whole. So that's a key message I'd like to make too. In terms of looking at housing, I think the whole day and the document that's been produced illustrates that it's important housing is seen not in isolation, and quite often sort of in the social housing and the wider housing sector, we often look at homes in isolation of everything else, and ultimately people who live in those homes have to either service a mortgage if they're an owner occupier, or service the rent in some respects. So they need to be economically active to be able to do that, or to have proper support in being able to make that affordable for them in their particular circumstances. And so the importance there, it's vital that we see housing as a subset of the economic proposition for an area. And for me, that's very much what's happening today with the document here. It's about how does housing contribute to the broader success of Greater Manchester and delivering what it's looking for. And in the same way, I often have quite a cheesy saying, I suppose, but one thing that's very fit for purpose. What's the point of giving someone a lovely home to enjoy their abject poverty in? Clearly, enjoying that poverty in a lovely home might be very marginally better than being in a very substandard home. But overall, in the overall terms, families still need to put food on the table, buy uniforms for the children, be able to go to work, have some broader life. And there's lots and lots of research, and it ties into what Sarah was saying before, to people who live in a decent home. And I don't mean a decent homestead home, I mean a quality place to live inside the front door and outside the front door. People who live in those places, the kids do better at school, they're going to be healthier and live longer, they're going to be more economically active and get a better chance of getting and sustaining employment, they're going to be less likely to be a victim or perpetrator of crime. All those things are true if we give people quality places to live. And then the overall aspect of that is that we can plan for that economic contribution that makes. But as you said before, Jill, COVID has shone a light on the disparities that we've seen, and it's really important. And I'll give you a small microcosm of my family. In January, we lost my mother through COVID. At the moment, I've tested positive, but I'm quite well because of having been double injected, double vaccinated rather. But my 17-year-old son's suffering quite difficult at the moment. So that's a microcosm of people, and we live in pretty good housing. People in not so good housing, that's exacerbated hugely for those individuals, and we need to do something to respond to that. And economically, post-COVID, the world has changed structurally, and the economy has changed structurally, and the planning process needs to take cognizance of those changes, needs to make sure that we, as Paul said before, we have decent indoor space, we have good outdoor space. The importance of public realm through the planning process has never been more important than it is at the moment. And we need healthy places. And until recently, I was the independent chairman of Knowsley's Health and Wellbeing Board. So those linkages between health, housing, and housing is very much the bookends for me of the health service, preventing people from going into the health service and moving people out of the health service and back into their communities at the other end. So the strategic planning process needs to take cognizance of all those things in the way that addresses the issues that's set out in the document. In terms of H4N, we're very much committed to greater devolution, to provide more local control over housing delivery, and we support all the areas and city regions and other areas across the north in seeking more control over that. We recognise that COVID really has had a greater impact in certain areas and certain demographics, and the lack of quality housing has been a key driver and something that's really exacerbated the issues that have been addressed through the pandemic. We do, however, see housing associations as a key driver strategically and as delivery vehicles to make sure that we get those proper places and proper towns, cities for the future. Housing associations are anchor institutions, again, tying into what Sarah was talking about. We're there and we're significant investors over the long term. So we're not looking to just deliver housing estates or housing developments and move out. We're long-term investors, but we're anchor institutions in those areas. For example, 40% of H4N homes are in the 10% most deprived areas in the north, and 70% of our homes are in the 20% most deprived areas. So we're really focusing on how we can contribute in a strategic way to making those places better places for people to live, and thereby enable them to contribute to the economy in a much better way and provide aspiration for people. Collectively, we add £2.5 billion a year to the northern economy. We house 1 million people, and we have nearly 18,000 employees working for the H4N members. So we do see ourselves as significant developers and significant contributors. We see that the work that's being done with the document today is a key aspect of moving that forward in one of the key areas of the north. And H4N are really committed to this agenda and the levelling up agenda, and would be more than happy to contribute to a broader debate around those issues. Thanks, Jill.
That's great, Steve. Thanks very much for that. And, again, thanks particularly for soldiering on, valiant effort to contribute to today. So that's really is appreciated. I think we're going to bring in Victoria Hills here now and welcome Victoria from the Royal Town Planning Institute. And really pleased that you're here today, because obviously we're talking about planning, plan making, and all of those things. And I'm really keen to sort of get your broader perspective on not just what the government's planning reforms, but also a response to places for everyone, and sort of looking at how Greater Manchester, your views really on the what we're doing here as well. So Victoria, just where are you? Come on.
I'm here. I am here. Can you see me? If I popped up on the screen.
All right.
There we go. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. Although I'm sat actually in London today. I should just say the Royal Town Planning Institute has a very strong presence in the Northwest. We've got a lot of members up there, and I think some of them are here with us today. So, but you're all, thank you for making me welcome, and you're all very welcome also. The Royal Town Planning Institute, we're a professional body, but I'm actually a chartered town planner, and I spent 16 years of my career working for all 3 mayors of London. So some of what I'm going to be saying is through the lens of the spatial development strategy powers afforded by the GLA Act, and that experience of the importance of strategic planning and what it can help deliver. I think firstly, it's congratulations on launching this, as we're aware that this revised, the plan launched today or yesterday is the first city region, certainly in the north of England, outside of the southeast, to produce a development plan document of this stature. So, you know, it's well done for getting this far, and a warm congratulations. We really do support the pooling of planning powers in the way that you've approached things here. I'll get on to some of the detail of that, but you know, we've long been an advocate for the importance of strategic planning and working across boundaries for the greater good, and you can deliver so much more working at that strategic level than you can on a district or borough unitary basis. I mean, just taking a step back, when you look at the powers that are available to local authorities, beyond the fiscal raising powers and the ability to raise money, rates, tax locally, really spatial development, the planning powers are the most important powers that local authorities have. So the ability for you now to work collectively across this region and harness that power really enables you to pack a bigger punch, for want of a better expression. Working together, it really will enable the city region to achieve so much more. Just focusing on some of these benefits, perhaps things that haven't already been mentioned, that certainty that's provided, the very much sort of, we are open for business, but we're open for this type of business, can be set out as it has been very clearly in this document. If the priority here is green growth and delivering many of the objectives that have already been touched upon in health, delivering on net zero, all of that can be set out in your shop window. Effectively, this plan is your shop window, and it provides, we're open for business, but we're open for this type of business. This is what we want to see delivered over the next few decades. But that helps provide certainty to investors, because ultimately you will need investors to help deliver this, and it will attract the right sort of investors that you want in the city region. It will attract infrastructure investment. So it was already mentioned earlier about, it's not just about investors, but it's about the infrastructure investment, transport, utilities. It's been very clear with those utilities as private companies, this is where we see growth happening, and this is where we're going to need you to align your investment programs with our plan. So it puts the city very much in the driving seat rather than having to be on the back foot to align with other people's investment plans. It flips it and says, you're going to need to align with our investment plans. What we've seen as an institute looking across this, not just in the UK and Ireland, but globally, is that the successful places are the places that have a comprehensive land use spatial strategy, particularly at that sort of city region level, city region area. We also see that the successful places are where you have fantastic leadership. You've had a very well-known and well-respected leader open today. And we think that political leadership is very important, but so is the executive leadership. So I'm just making a plug here for that important role of Chief Planning Officer being at the top table. Got a fantastic plan here, but you are going to need that senior leadership, both political and executive, to help drive this forward. Also at the right level to help leverage in alignment and of those other investment strategies and policy strategies, but also to help identify some of the synergies. And just on that, one of the things we've been looking at and really pushing through the reform agenda, because we know planning reform is coming. We've just celebrated, in inverted commas, the first birthday of the white paper, Planning for the Future. We haven't had the response yet from government, so we're all eager to see what it says to that consultation. But one of the things we've been pushing through our response to government is the idea of green growth boards. And putting it very simply, if you've got your spatial strategy, which is the overlay, the umbrella of what you want, where you want it, and how you want it, and when you want it, it's about bringing together the other elements, which you've got them all here. Transport is huge, so you've got transport for North, transport for Greater Manchester, homes for the North also, along with the other people who are investing and delivering in the region. So that's got to include the NHS, it's got to include the HE and further education, it's got to include private investors, the utility companies, the transport authorities, the local authorities, and bringing everybody round the table to align with your spatial development strategy. So well done on getting places for everyone launched. That really gets you in pole position at the starting line, if you like, because it is the starting line in terms of this is where we're going. Now the real trick is how you get those other really important components, the transport strategy, the climate change. If you've got a climate commission here, apologies, I don't know if you do, but it's about getting that aligned to the spatial strategy, along with all those public and private sector investors I've talked about, so that they understand, as we promote at the Institute, that really, if you're playing a game of top trumps, the spatial strategy should be winning every time. And it's about getting them to align in with that spatial strategy. So just to finish, planning really is, put simply, all about joining the dots and staying connected. This spatial strategy enables you a fantastic framework to join those dots, to align the other investment strategies, be very clear about what you want, where you want it. But it's also very important to stay connected with all those other components and keep talking to them. I'm sure you've already got some fabulous governance arrangements in place across the city region, but now's perhaps as good a time as any to check whether they are absolutely fit for purpose for what you're going to need to deliver this spatial strategy as you move forward. And finally, just on that staying connected point, we know that there's planning reform coming down the line. We've already had a whole heap of it already with Class E and PDRs, but there is more to come. And that's why we've launched the Politicians in Planning Network this summer, which is free to join for any elected members who are listening in today. And I will put a link in the chat shortly on that, because it's more important than ever that politicians work closely with the executive and vice versa as we move into a time of change for planning, but also as you're moving forward as a really important part of delivery. Is about working together, staying connected, and understanding this rapidly changing landscape. So congratulations, well done. Thank you so much for having us here as part of this conversation today. I've really enjoyed it so far, and I think there's more to come. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. Well said. Really good to have you here, and you're very, very welcome. You know, again, the importance of joining it all up. And you know, I think, you know, Greater Manchester's got a, you know, is leading the way in so many ways on the climate, you know, net zero target of 2038. I think we're the first city region to do that, and how that actually, we had a really good session with Great Homes for Greater Manchester around the green retrofit, the skills, the jobs, and the innovation. So that's all coming together as part of that recovery. So thank you very much. And I'm going to bring in Dr. Ian Mell. Ian, are you there? He's from the University of Manchester, you know, a fantastic academic institution, which we're all very proud of. But one of the things we're also very proud is around innovation and leadership joining up. So Ian, your thoughts on strategic planning, please.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for Great Homes for Greater Manchester for this invitation to come and speak to you all. And thank you to Victoria, actually, because pretty much everything I'm about to say might be the same, but with the word environment tacked on the end of it. I think mainly what's really interesting about working in the Northwest is the synergies that we have between, say, the Liverpool City region, where I've done a lot of work, and Greater Manchester in itself. And I think unlike many other places, maybe in the Northeast, for example, where it's a little bit more fragmented, there is this interchange of experience of ideas. Yes, there's a competitiveness between the city regional mayors, but there's an understanding that to think about the best ways in which we can deliver homes or new infrastructure or environmental enhancement requires this combination of experience, of knowledge, of pragmatism in many cases to actually get things done. So I think the work that Paul Dennett has been doing with promoting green space in Salford, with Chris Bourbon and the Mayor of Manchester doing their thing on cycling, is just an example of how this has been put forward. And even with the Liverpool City Region's work on climate justice funded via the RTPI for Steve Rotham, I think they're examples of this. And I think if we're thinking about the way in which the environment can help us to deliver some of these big ideas on strategic planning, I don't necessarily think it's about building back better. I think it's about building better things, because what are we building back from? And COVID has really shined a light on the value of parks and green spaces and the waterways of the Northwest, and particularly Greater Manchester, where it was the only place people were allowed to go to. And I personally live in Bury, so Heaton Park is our local park, and it was packed for 18 months, annoyingly packed, but it was great that people were using it. So I think one thing that we need to be careful of and need to be really aware of, and I think the Place for Everyone document does this, is this notion of an understanding of nested hierarchies of what works at the local has to fit with what works at the neighbourhood, the borough, the district, and the strategic. And I think this is why the way in which green infrastructure and landscape enhancement is being presented in the Place for Everyone document is a good step forward. It utilises the river network to allow people to see what can happen in the centre of Manchester, can also benefit what might happen in Oldham or Rochdale. It allows people to engage with and access the environment in their doorstep, but also maybe something a little bit further afield. And I think that understanding that the environment isn't just the local park, or it isn't just the green belt, but actually it's a combination of all these things, and they deliver a whole host of different functions and amenities. They might be about health and well-being, they might be about biodiversity corridors or flood mitigation or climate change adaptation, but all these things are part of what makes a city and a city region thrive and make it livable and functional and accessible. And I think what's really happened over the last 18 months is that people who don't necessarily engage with planning or development on a normal day-to-day basis have started to think about these things simply because they've been either at home too much, or they've been in their park more, or maybe out in the countryside, and have started to really look at what they're seeing and where they are, rather than just going for a walk. It's why are we going for that walk? Why are we using this place? What benefits does it have? And I think that understanding has a resonance in individuals and communities, which will hopefully stay with us over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Because if it does, it will provide people like me, academics, politicians, green space practitioners, with a really strong hook to get people involved and to show them that extra value. And I think that understanding that value is not just about the big or the small, but it's about this combination of the cumulative value of being able to walk to the park, the cumulative value of being able to walk your kids to school down a quiet street, the ability to not have to sit near traffic on a busy road all day. And I think these are things that the profession of planning have known for many years, but people are starting to really actively engage with them. You think about the backlash to low traffic neighbourhoods, it's because people have been forced to change their behaviour, which I think is a good thing, but also it's a longer term thing to think about. So this notion that all green space, all the environment is valuable, but its cumulative benefit might not be known. So we have to be aware of the little things add to the big things to add something even larger. And that's why I think the Places for Everyone document, with its discussion of the Green Space Fund, of green space enhancement at the very local and the strategic, is really important. And the collective understanding from the 9 boroughs involved, I think, is really really fundamental to this, that actually we can't look at the river network of Greater Manchester just in Manchester or just in Trafford. Actually, it goes all the way from the uplands of Cumbria all the way down into the peak. So we have to think more collectively. I think that's where strategic enhancement really works, and linked to the local nature recovery networks work piloted by Natural England, linked to the Greater Manchester Combined Authorities view on natural capital accounting. I think there's lots of ways in which the Northwest in particular, and Greater Manchester specifically, is starting to look at the ways in which the strategic can be devolved in some senses down to the local, to make individual councillors, to make individual developers, and particularly make communities to really engage with these ideas. And when you have people like City of Trees, the Mersey Forest, who have worked for 30 years now to try and develop these relationships, and I think they're the people who are really pushing local people to engage with it. But people like the GMCA are pushing it at the strategic as well. So there's this combination that we're working through. And I think finally, just what I'll say, I think there's a growing coherence around strategic planning, which looks at the bigger picture and the bigger notions of the climate emergency, the fallout from the IPCC report on Monday, and what we have to do to try and stop the catastrophe which is coming very quickly down the road. And I think something like Places for Everyone is a stepping stone towards that. It's that realization that planners in the environment sector may be at the forefront of this conversation, and we get pushback from communities, from developers, from politicians of certain colours, but actually there's a way in which the environment can lead this conversation and lead it effectively. One thing we have to be careful of though is terminology. So green belts, very emotive. Should we keep them? Should we get rid of them? We all have an opinion. Mine may be slightly different to other people's, but there's a conversation about their value and their amenity value and their strategic value. And we have the same with greening railways or greening road networks. We have the same with greening housing and making it more sustainable and more livable, sort of thing that Steve was talking about. And I think if we can find a common language, which I think the document does, that actually allows people from the very top to people like my parents who don't really deal with planning to deal with these things, I think we've got a far greater chance to implement some of these ideas and actually get people to understand the value of strategic planning, rather than just we hate planners because they want to build some houses, because that's a very reductive, simplistic argument, and one which when you start to actually talk to people about why you might want some new houses or a new school or a new road, they start to see the economic, the health and well-being, the social and the environmental value. And I think Manchester's been very clear and forceful and forward thinking in terms of how it does that. So I think the future's bright. I think the future is interesting. And I think as long as we continue to collaborate with other regions of the Northwest and even Leeds and Sheffield and maybe even the Northeast, I think we'll see some really, really innovative forms of spatial environmental planning being brought forward, which should hopefully help us to address some of these bigger issues. So, thank you.
Gill, you're on mute.
Dear, I've done it again. Anyway, thanks very much, Ian. It's really interesting, again, that big connection between the environment and place and how we need to join up. And I think all of the contributions today have made that very clear. And I do, going back to Greater Manchester and that ambition that is set out so clearly in Places for Everyone. You know, I just want to bring back Paul very briefly to just sort of get your, I hopefully you're going to be quite pleased with what you've heard, because people seem to like what you've put down there. So just a few quick thoughts on that joined upness and you know, any other comments that you want to come back on, Paul.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Gill. And it's really great to hear colleagues' reflections, obviously coming from different spheres of society and obviously having a slightly different perspective on the importance of plan making. But I think, you know, everyone's agreed that, you know, the importance of having a plan is for everyone to see, really. You know, having a clear, coherent strategy that's iterative, that's co-designed, that speaks to the environment, that speaks to society and community, but also that speaks to, you know, where we're going economically as a city region after, you know, what has probably been, you know, the biggest crisis certainly I've seen in my life economically as a consequence of COVID-19. I think all the points made are really well made. I mean, Ian makes some really good points about the importance of the environment in terms of leading, next steps in the conversation. And it is very much at the heart of what we're trying to do here. We see green infrastructure as not just being about the green belt, but about accessible green spaces, about our rivers, about our walkways, about walking and cycling, active transport, and also about some of the challenges we face as a city region as we continue to grow and develop in terms of water management. So sustainable drainage systems, nature-based solutions to water management, very much at the heart of what we're trying to deliver here. And importantly for us as well, it's about rewilding, if you like, the city region, bringing nature back into Greater Manchester. I live in a city that was once termed dirty old town, and now we have birds of prey and otters in the River Irwell. It's absolutely fantastic. And residents, communities, children, schools just love this sort of thing. So I think, Ian is absolutely right. Putting the environment and its interface with nature as well at the heart of what we're trying to achieve here is absolutely important. I think for us, though, it's about trying to create sustainable places, and that speaks to, the climate change challenges we're all facing. So delivering net zero carbon homes, thinking about modular, modern methods of construction, some of the challenges within the construction industry and how we create jobs and opportunities through this plan to again offset the impact of COVID-19 and some of the economic challenges we face is very much at the heart of what we're doing. And I think, what Victoria said about the overall importance of having a plan, absolutely. I mean, we're just about to go into a comprehensive spending review with the government. We've done really well in terms of brownfield housing fund monies, but we need government to work with us more on this agenda in terms of tackling some of the real challenging issues we face with things like viability, and how when you look at the Treasury's Green Book appraisal, often it's skewing money into London and the southeast because of its infatuation with land value uplift and obviously buoyant housing markets. So having a plan and having a clear and coherent strategy is absolutely critical, in my opinion, if we're going to make those arguments back to government to actually deliver levelling up and deliver building back better. But I also think, for me, thinking more medium to long term is very much at the heart of all of this. And, it is about, what we're trying to do in terms of delivering net zero carbon homes, in terms of carbon neutrality by 2038 for Greater Manchester, our 2040 strategy around transportation. And also, it's about being clear with the investment community, public and private, about where we want to see Greater Manchester going. So for all of those reasons, I entirely agree. I think the point you made as well around, one public estate in terms of, how this interfaces with the NHS and other public bodies and owners of land and assets, very much at the heart of all of this. And, the interface with utility companies, which we know often have 5-year capital cycles, very much at the heart of all of this. And we have an infrastructure board and framework that actually talks to this. And we have representatives from, Cadent on there, Electricity Northwest, United Utilities. So just to reassure you around some of the governance that sits behind all of this, it is very much part of our thinking. So yeah, no, it's been great to get colleagues' feedback. Obviously, we're in the middle of a consultation, so I'm really eager for people to participate further with their thoughts, with their feedback, to inform this, because ultimately for me, plan making is an iterative process. Yes, there are certain points in time when you have to do things, but actually continuing to have that conversation with the people of Greater Manchester and stakeholders in Greater Manchester is very much what this is about. Thanks, Jill.
Thanks, Paul. So we're going to open it up now to discussion, debate, perhaps look at what could possibly go wrong, and also the need to actually make this happen. We've already had from one of our Councillor Hannah Roberts, who is a regular attender of Great Homes for Greater Manchester, but she says, and I will bring you in, Hannah, at some point, there is a long way to go to involve those people who would benefit from homes and jobs in this process, and to convince people there is a wider debate to be had than just the green belt, important though that is. I think it's a valid point, and we'll come back to that, I think. But I'm going to bring in James Stevens from the Home Builders Federation. James, if you're there, but also Lord, I'm very pleased again, if Lord Best, you wanted to come back or come and speak to us, I would be highly delighted. As people will know, Lord Best is a big champion of affordable housing, and has been on many of our calls over the course of the pandemic and before. So if he wants to say something, that would be good. And please, any other questions, or if you indicate that you want to come in now, please do that. And I want to come back and, you know, get again, if the panel really want to answer a question, just put your hands up. So I'll kick off with you, James. Okay, thanks.
Gill, and thank you very much, and thanks very much to your speakers who've kind of discussed, I think, some really interesting questions in relation to the Places for Everyone plan. First off, congratulations to Mayor Dennett for steering this through. Really welcome the publication of the plan. It's been long awaited, and we know that it's been a very difficult political journey in getting this plan through to the publication stage. So can I extend my thanks to you, Paul, for doing that. I think the journey could have been easier, and this is reflecting, Gill, upon the discussion that we had at the last roundtable. The journey could have been easier had Greater Manchester been given equivalent powers to those enjoyed by the Mayor of London, so that he didn't have to rely upon the unanimity of the 10 local authorities. I mean, I've had this discussion before. Mayor Burnham has said that he kind of thinks that the model of subsidiarity in Greater Manchester is more effective. I kind of think that that is a political compromise as well. And to a certain extent, I think the central government have been reluctant to give Mayor Burnham greater powers, because they haven't really, you know, they've been nervous about the implications of, say, a stronger city centre, perhaps a Labour-dominated city centre, ruling over what might happen amongst the periphery local authorities. But I think that does lead to delaying and ineffective plan making. But nevertheless, we've got somewhere with the Places of Everyone plan. Just listening to all the contributions from others, I'd just like to say, I think from the HBF's perspective, the benefit of spatial planning is probably more prosaic from our point of view, because under law, development can only proceed in accordance with the development plan, and we have very dated local plans for the 10 constituent local authorities. So at least the Places for Everyone plan for the 9 will provide an up-to-date development plan against which planning decisions can be made. Once it is adopted, it will automatically update the 9 local authority plans and provide an up-to-date template basis upon which decisions can be made. I've had a read through the plan. I'm going to be preparing my representations in consultation with the members. A couple of areas where we might foresee some difficulties is the phasing, the delayed phasing. So rather than delivering the 10,300 a year required under the standard method, it'll be down to about 8,300. That potentially means that you'll be under delivering against housing needs in the short term. I can understand the political compromises behind that decision. And then the balance of flats against houses, where some 60% of the future supply is going to be in apartments, potentially questionable given our experiences with the pandemic. But nevertheless, congratulations on getting the plan to publication. Thank you.
Okay, no particular order, and if anybody wants to indicate if they want to reply, but maybe the first one, Hannah's question, which is really around engagement. How do you actually switch people onto this? And this is obviously the consultation process. You know, I think there is a great awareness, obviously, but how are you going to get sort of the people that we're really trying to help here to really get that traction and relevance and support, really? I don't know, anybody can answer that, but I'll go back to Paul in particular. And then in answer to James' question really about the phased, delayed phasing, I wonder if there's any comments on there, but just please stick your hand up. And I'm glad that Richard's also popped in. So I'll come to you next. So Victoria, you've got your hand up to reply. So
thank you. Yes, I have a couple of short reflections. I think, as was touched on by one of the speakers, we are in a sort of a sweet spot in time where if there was ever a time when the community, and Joe Public is interested in talking about planning, housing, environment, climate change, health, inequalities, it's now. We've had the major seismic shock to society. There were structural changes coming down the line anyway, but the pandemic has fast-tracked a lot of that. But it's also shone a light on some of the structural inequalities that have been sort of referenced earlier. So I think there is an opportunity to make the most of the shock to the system, to engage with the public, but it must be done authentically and it must be done organically, really. And we think local authorities should be leading that. We've seen in the past, and I'm sure some of them are listening on now, and they do fantastic jobs, but engagement teams within the private sector sort of helicopter in, do a bit of engagement on a piece of planning, could be a development, could be something broader, and then they're off out and on to the next. What we've been calling for in the conference spending review, Invest and Prosper, which we launched last year, we called for an awful lot, actually, £500 million worth of funding for local authorities over 4 years. But within that, one of the components was community planners. So somebody whose job it is to be a planner in a local authority, but their job is to talk with the community, and they're a golden thread. They're a person to go to, or people to go to. They work with the community. So you've got to build that capacity within the local authorities so that planning departments aren't just writing a plan and then reacting to it. They're actually holding the hands and working with the community as they go along. So we think that investment is really, really important. You've got the plan here. You've got local authorities with no doubt excellent planners working through the development control, the management of it. But you also need that enhanced capacity within to work with the community, and that's got to be embedded within local authorities. They're best place to do it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Victoria. Paul, did you want to come back, and Sarah, you've got your hand up as well. So on who wants to go first? Paul, you come back first and I'll come to you, Sarah. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Jill. In terms of the wider debate around homes and jobs, I think the point is really well made, because economically, COVID has had a significant impact, the likes of which, if we're honest with ourselves, we haven't actually seen yet. So, building homes that are sustainable for the future is very much part of the thinking within this plan. And, we talk about net zero carbon homes, we talk about, delivering carbon neutral by 2038, we talk about modern methods of construction, modular homes. This plan speaks to that whole sort of works and skills agenda when it comes to sustainable homes for the future here in Greater Manchester. Also, in terms of jobs, I did talk a lot about, rebalancing the economy, sustaining that southern competitiveness, sustaining the central business district of Greater Manchester, whilst also seeing more economic growth in those northern districts within the city region. Jobs is very much at the heart of any recovery from COVID-19. And jobs means development, it means attracting investment, it means bringing businesses into Greater Manchester, it means what we do with our universities and educational institutions in terms of innovation, research and development. It's very much at the heart of what we're trying to achieve here through Places for Everyone. So just to reassure colleagues that that is very much part of the conversation here. I mean, it was previously called the Plan for Jobs, Homes and the Environment. Obviously, we've now called it Places for Everyone, but just to say jobs and homes and the delivery of that is very much at the heart of what we're trying to achieve here. In terms of under delivery, I mean, ultimately, we think we're going to meet local housing need over the period of the plan. Obviously, we have a requirement to have a 5-year land supply, and we think working across the 9 districts will have that 5-year land supply to meet local housing needs. So we think the phasing isn't too much of a problem at all, to be honest with you. And actually, when you think about strategic planning, it takes some time, doesn't it, to come forward with, you know, infrastructure proposals. And we talk about sustainable sites within the plan as well. So bringing forward some of those sites will take considerable time to make sure the infrastructure is in place to be able to deliver those sustainable communities for Greater Manchester. So the challenge is obviously after all of this is how we operationalize it, but we think, you know, the phasing isn't too problematic. The point made around flats and housing, you know, at the moment, you know, I'm being reassured that there is still a buoyant housing market within Greater Manchester in terms of apartments and flats, and people want to live close to the core of the city region where lots of things are happening. And obviously, when you look at the demographics as well, we see a lot more younger people choosing to live closer to the city centre. So, you know, we are reassured, certainly from the analysis we've done, which informs obviously the actual plan making process. It's one of the tests of soundness, actually, is how evidence-based our plan is. We are reassured that, you know, that split between homes in terms of housing and flats is appropriate. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And that's great. Thanks, Paul. And Sarah, your thoughts?
Yeah, it was just really briefly, probably the points have already been touched on, really, but it was just really to speak to Hannah's question, that I think there is a real need to democratise the debate on housing, and not just housing, actually, the kind of our economic model in areas like Greater Manchester, and to help to kind of reconnect people to the economy and to see wealth going back into communities and into people's pockets as well. And I think that there's a wider debate to be had about that, which links housing up to wider questions around jobs and recovery. I think that also speaks to the fact that a lot of what we think about when we talk about debate and conversations with people about these issues is that it tends to be driven by process, and particularly the process of getting a massive project like this through the planning system, and the achievement of that, you know, can't be underestimated. But I think that the conversation about how we involve people, how people are able to participate in that process is probably it probably needs new ideas as to how we create new spaces for those conversations and new opportunities which aren't necessarily dependent on the planning process itself. And then the other point I wanted to make briefly was about ownership. We tend to rely on a fairly kind of linear way of thinking about ownership in this country in relation to housing and planning and land development. And I think this could be an opportunity to explore different, more pluralistic models of ownership, including community land trusts, cooperatives and so on. And I think the fact that our housing market is so dominated by a few very large national players is a problem for everyone, and particularly in areas of where land values tend to be low. So I think a conversation about ownership and how we diversify and really disrupt that a little bit, I think is going to be really important if we're to deliver on this as well. Yeah,
thanks for that disruptor, you know, sort of messages. A valid one. So here we go, a round of applause for Sarah, and Lord Best, come on in.
Sorry, I'm just trying to put my hand down.
I wonder why you weren't answering.
Can I pick up on
I wonder why you weren't answering. Was it on silent?
Oh, I don't know what's going on there.
Somebody else there. No, I was going to pick up a couple of points that Sarah raised on the public engagement, the wider engagement of everybody. I don't know whether the excellent places for everyone strategy includes ways of reaching people, but the new technique of citizens' assemblies, like citizens' juries, only with perhaps 100 people involved, that can work really well, and that is an opportunity for people to spend a bit more time than just the usual knee-jerk reaction to we don't want a development next to us, to look at a whole plan and sign up to it, get buy-in from people by allowing the opportunity for people to spend longer than usual thinking through, working through in a team, in a group, what's going to happen next. Anyway, so citizens' assemblies, I think, you know, there's more to go, worth doing more on it. Sarah was also raising the point about house builders and the speed at which they'll act. Not surprised to hear house builders saying that they may be slower than expected. This is the pattern that we've got used to. House builders not building out at the speed that we hoped for, letting us down, in fact. I wonder whether it's asking too much to go for what doesn't sound too radical. Oliver Letwin's formula of acquiring sites, local authorities themselves acquiring sites, larger sites, and then having a master plan and parceling out the development of those sites to different groups, community land trusts, yes, to the house builders for sure, to housing associations, but the control in the hands of a development corporation established by, owned by 100% the local authority, in this case, the combined authority. Oh, that's so much better. And then because you've got the variety and diversity of people all building at the same time, you do get the build out on time. You get some action instead of us waiting while the house builders watch the house prices and only do the next phase when they've sold everything and pocketed the money. So is this a chance to be just a bit more radical? Although I must say this Places for Everyone really is a great example of what next for planning and for development. Gill's on mute.
Every time I do that, just like, anyway, I'm back. So yeah, thank you very much, Richard. Very calls for being more radical, Paul. What do you think to say about that? James, I suspect you might have something to say about your home builders, but I'll come back to you. Do you want to come back, Paul, now?
Yeah, I don't mind, Gill. In terms of consultation and engagement, anyone who's familiar with this will know that this has been going on for many, many years now. And actually, we've done an awful lot of engagement and consultation with residents, businesses, developers, stakeholders, partners within Greater Manchester. And this is the latest iteration of consultation and engagement. And in a sense, the approach we take within Greater Manchester is a kind of hub and spoke model where we expect, you know, minimum standards around consultation from the combined authority. And it's down to the districts participating in this plan making process to ultimately supplement that within their districts to engage their communities, their elected representatives, and go beyond, if you like, what we're asking from the centre. But just to reassure colleagues, you know, we've had significant engagement through this process to get us to where we've got today. Thousands and thousands of responses have been collated in the two previous consultations. They've been analysed, they've been reported on, and that's been then built into the latest iteration of Places for Everyone. So I think in terms of public consultation, I think I can't, you know, honestly put my hand on my heart and say I've seen anything done more of that than Places for Everyone, or what was previously known as the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. But, you know, I agree, you know, citizens' assemblies are useful vehicles, and I've seen them used really well across a whole range of different policy initiatives. We use one ourselves in Salford called the Poverty Truth Commission, where people who have experienced poverty or, you know, wanted to be involved in that because, you know, they felt they had something to say, influence policy, strategy and decision making that the local authority undertakes. And, you know, we weren't prescriptive in that. It was very much bottom up, and it was very much, you know, empowering people in our communities to actually inform strategy and policy at a local level. So yeah, a big advocate of that. I think the points made around Oliver Letwin are, you know, music to my ears. In Salford, we've set up a wholly owned development company outside of the housing revenue account. It's called Derive. The reason why we've done that is because the market isn't delivering the homes we need ultimately. And it's only through state intervention at a local level, in my opinion, that we can actually deliver the homes we need, i.e. truly affordable housing, homes for social rent, or homes capped at the local housing allowance. Because at the moment, what's coming through the planning system, by and large, is not affordable, especially in the north, where we have huge challenges with viability. You know, property prices aren't what they are in London and the south east, and ultimately the build costs don't differ significantly. So inevitably there is a viability conundrum there. And it's only where the state often intervenes, be that through, you know, marginal viability allocations, housing investment fund, or more recently the brownfield housing fund monies, that we can actually get development away here. So I think there's something about, you know, the role of local authorities in all of this. And, you know, I say that, you know, with a broad view here, because, you know, we're using our leverage as a anchor institution here in Salford to actually get away community-led housing, working with community organisations, using some of our land holdings, getting them to think about registering as a registered provider to access affordable homes money through Homes England. So we've got to think creatively in this space, but I'm absolutely convinced that local authorities are the vehicle for tackling the housing and homelessness crisis. What we need, though, is more powers. We need an ending of right to buy, and we need more money desperately flowing into local authorities to allow us to tackle the crisis.
Yeah, that sounds radical stuff, and I didn't expect that we'd have so many, you know, plaudits for Oliver Letwin, but I'm going to look into that for sure. So we've got Steve Coffey on the panel. Can you come in now, Steve, with your thoughts? If Hannah Roberts is there, and James, I'm going to ask you to come back as well, and then we're probably done. Okay, Steve.
Thanks, Jill. I just wanted to come back in briefly on that, on Richard's call to be more radical, and then the point Paul picked up on. To some extent, it's all about relationships, but we do have the vehicles that we can use to intervene in that way, and that's by those partnerships between housing associations and local authorities, and how we can use that in a way that actually drives strategically sites forward, not just bringing associations in on the Section 106 level. But if we can do that and we can start delivering at construction rates at a planned level rather than at absorption rates, because if we rely on the market to do that, we'll always have ups and downs and peaks and cycles that are based upon absorption rates of how homes can be delivered. If we can plan that properly, we can deliver to meet the needs we've established through proper construction rates in a planned way, with end users already identified, and those links between really positive relationships at local authority level with partner associations. That's the sort of holy grail for me, and we can actually square that circle and deliver even through good times and bad times, because that's also a counter-cyclical model.
Thank you for that. And Hannah, where are you? There she is.
I'm here. So it was my question that prompted, or my comment, I suppose, that prompted some of this debate. And I think, you know, you won't be surprised as politicians, I share a lot of the views that Paul Dennett has expressed. But I do have to say that of the thousands and thousands of responses that we had, many of those were from my own ward, and they all focused on greenbelt boundaries. So I think what we've really struggled to do is to move on the debate from having a debate about reshaping the greenbelt to a debate which is about what it is that we actually want to achieve. And I think that you know, that's still an issue for us. So it's been kind of an exhaustive and exhausting process, really, the whole thing. You know, standing in really crowded school halls when we could still do that, talking to a lot of very angry people about what was in the plan. You know, people have had a lot of opportunities to express their views, but as the way with many of these things, we've heard the views of those people who already have a stake, rather than those people who don't have a stake and who are the people who most need the jobs and homes that we're talking about. And I think that despite the fact that there is, you know, I am doubtful as to how many have read Places for Everyone. I applaud anyone who actually has read it all. And, you know, because the debate that we had at our full...
Oh, Hannah, you've knocked your microphone.
Right, sorry. The debate we had at full council, where we agreed that we would go forward with the publication and submission of the plan, was a lot focused from our political opponents around around issues around infrastructure, GPs, schools, roads, sewers, you know, and all that kind of thing. And despite the fact there's a lot in the plan that talks about how all of those things need to be delivered, the truth is that, you know, the impact of all of the years that we've had of austerity and on people's, you know, the fact that people can't now get to see a GP for whatever reason, you know, it very much kind of colours the kind of debate that we have. And that's what I think I meant about, I think it's kind of hard to move people on to talk about the reality of what it is that we're proposing and why it is that we think that it's a good idea. And it's a hard thing to do. So I suppose I think that it's the fact that we've got this far, it's not over yet, is it? We've still got to go through the inquiry, and then we all have to agree that we're going to adopt. And there was a lot of political opposition from this, from, you know, from the in Oldham, from Conservative, Liberal Democrat and independent councillors. So I do think, you know, that the political landscape of all of this, because you did ask right at the very beginning, what might the threats be? And I think that's still the issue, is the politics of it, yeah, and how that plays out, and the job that we still need to do to convince the residents, yeah, that this will benefit them.
Yeah. So I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, but that's, you know, politics often does get in the way of a really good plan, and no, particularly as we know even from the government with you know, their planning reforms, we need to get behind places for everyone. People, I think everybody from Ian and Victoria that sort of joined up, connected, saying this is really an opportunity in time for us to get this right. You know, hopefully, you know, that political will be there, and, you know, Great Homes for Greater Manchester will be pushing, you know, that as far as we can with our MPs, peers and the GMCA, just to get that collaboration to say this is our plan and it is popular. We've got to listen, of course we have, but what we don't want is to be here in another year's time still talking, because that, you know, we don't have time. We don't have time for, you know, achieving net zero, the retrofit, the skills, the jobs. It is relevant to everybody to get behind places for everyone and see those homes built, get the economy moving, you know, make sure we live in healthier environments and healthy spaces. So that's, I'm getting on my soapbox here a bit, but there we go. And James, I'll just, I'm just being very naughty now. I'm going to give you the final word. We're already over time, but just quickly, I'm pretty sure that you will get behind places for everyone.
Absolutely, no, I'm fully behind it, and in fact, I will be recommending to the membership that we really support this plan, and I think they will, because I think something like about 8 out of 10 of the local plans for Greater Manchester are very, very out of date. And, you know, that's one of the contributing factors, perhaps, to why delivery levels haven't been so great in Greater Manchester. I mean, Lord Best referred to the issue of, I wasn't sure if he was referring to land banking or the market absorption rate. There is a big debate around that, and I think the government needs to get to the bottom of that. HBF published a paper in conjunction with Lichfields saying that there's an awful lot of double counting in the local government association's figures. We kind of really dispute that. And in fact, housing delivery nationally is the best that it has been for about 30 years. You know, Letwin did make an important observation that one of the keys to improving delivery is a diversity of site sizes to encourage a diversity of different types of developers. One of the things I will be looking at Greater Manchester in the Place of Everyone plan is the extent to which it actually supports SMEs entering the market. And one of the problems I found in commenting on local plans in London is the reluctance of the London boroughs to actually allocate small sites, despite that being a requirement to national planning policy. And just on the issue of resources for brownfield redevelopment, I absolutely agree with Mayor Dennett, and this is something the HBF would happily support. Greater Manchester, we really do need that, but I also think it's right that Greater Manchester is focusing upon public transport, improving that, because that will be the key in the medium to long term to opening up housing markets across GM. And just very lastly, on citizens' assemblies, I don't think they're radical. I think that's stage managed democracy. I think it's authoritarian, if anything else. So no, not in favour of citizens.
There we are. Controversial note to end on. As always, I think we've had a really good debate. I'm really pleased that Great Homes for Greater Manchester have been able to facilitate this in our Keys to Recovery series. We're going to, our next gig is the big one, Housing 2021 at the Chartered Institute of Housing Conference, which is in Manchester Central. We're holding a sort of huge sort of launch and reception showcasing what Greater Manchester can do, including places for everyone, hopefully. Yeah, do come, and we'll make sure you get the invite. You don't have to pay to attend that, so you'll get a code and a free place, so and that's really worth something. So I hope to see most of you there and everybody else who's been involved. But that concludes the Keys to Recovery series. For all those regular attendees and everybody who's been on the call, special thanks to Paul Dennett as always, Steve Coffey for being, struggling on, Sarah, lovely to see you, and also always super contribution, Victoria, fantastic, sitting in London, and Ian, really good stuff from the University of Manchester. Thanks always to Lord Best, Jane Stevens, Hannah, of course, and also a big thanks to Jonathan there, which I was going to bring you in, Jonathan, but very good to see you. So thanks very much to everybody, and have a nice day wherever you're going or not doing or not going. We'll see you soon. Thank you.